When civilians approach, shout, "Hands up!" Should the order not be obeyed, shoot, and shoot with effect. If any persons approaching you carry their hands in their pockets, or are in any way suspicious looking, shoot them down. You may make mistakes occasionally, and innocent persons may be shot, but you're bound to get the right person sometimes. The more you shoot, the better I will like you. And I assure you that no policeman will get in trouble for shooting any man, and I guarantee your names will not be given at the inquest.
An unarmed body of men fighting one of the biggest empires at that time in the world, armed to the teeth with tanks, guns and God knows what. There was nothing left to us except guerrilla tactics.
It was quite easy for us to do it because the people were with us. We had no enemies, only the British forces.
It was never really clarified was whether they were to behave like soldiers or policemen. Their mixture of army and police uniforms symbolized their ambivalent role and gave them a nickname, the Black&Tans. As they patrolled the Irish countryside, their enemy was the IRA flying columns, groups of 20 men or so constantly on the move, attacking them and then melting into the countryside. A roadblock might be an ambush. Experience on the Western Front proved irrelevant when dealing with guerrillas, and the fight against an unseen enemy was both bewildering and frustrating.
We saw any pigeons or sparrows flying away from the roof, we would dive into a doorway.
Sometimes you might get a car with not enough protection, you'd be able to lob a grenade in. And all you could do then was say, "Here, share that amongst you."
If we could catch them, we would kill them. And they were actually in the act of laying an ambush. The question of them or us.
We were called by some journalists at the time the fleas, and we bit them in the way and came back and bit them again.
We weren't scared at all. We didn't care about them as long as that we had a chance to fight back. And if you can fight back and shoot back, then you feel all right.
Complete law to themselves, they were given a free hand to do what they liked, and they did what they liked. They shot, burned, murdered, beat up, did anything they liked, and they burned Balbriggan and many other Irish towns.
Convinced the Irish that Britain was unfit to administer Ireland, and led them to support the IRA. The Black&Tans are remembered and hated to this day.
They just ran through every town and village, guns at the ready, firing indiscriminately at passers-by, and at night breaking into people's houses, taking all the males out and bringing them either to the jail or barracks, questioning them and searching them, and very often took people out and they didn't come back home again, they were killed.
He had about 4 or 5 sons in the IRA. None of them were there when the auxiliaries came, but they came in nevertheless and said they had to kill somebody in the house, and he would do, the old man would do. So his wife and daughter struggled with them, and this was just going on in the little kitchen. And one of his boys who had TB was sick, and he had been hiding somewhere adjacent, and he came out and said, "Don't kill my father. If you have to kill someone, kill me." So then the women tried to save him, And he put their hands away and he went out, and they shot him on the doorstep outside the door.
They were charming. They were always drunk, of course. And their great delight was to roar up and down the road in their big open army trucks, letting off rounds of blank ammunition to any woman they saw by herself.
By late 1920, Ireland had become a grim battleground, a scene of guerrilla warfare between two increasingly ruthless bands of armed men, the Tans and the IRA. The IRA blew up bridges, set ambushes, and interfered generally with British communications all over Ireland.
And the IRA, they used to dig trenches in the road around the corners to try and get, well, to stop traffic and to get people to fall in.
You come across this and down and go your front wheels, wallop, straight in. And that's when they used to throw, and they might have one or two homemade salmon tin bombs. Occasionally they'd have one or two of them, you know, and they'd throw them over.
In the bombs there was gelignite, bolts, pieces of iron, and scrap metal.
It would always shoot in the back, naturally. We had two fellas shot in the back in Macroom while they were walking down the street.
The IRA also dealt with Irishmen as informers.
3 armed men in trench coats knocked at the door. His wife answered it, and they said, "Mr. Becker in?" He said, "Yes, we want to see him." He called to the door, and they shot him before his wife on the doorstep.
In all this, the British Army played a relatively subsidiary role.
The Black&Tans were rather welcomed by us because they had more liberty than we had, you see. We were in the position of the ordinary British soldier who must not retaliate. The Black&Tans did retaliate, and in fact went too far.
The Black&Tans came into the picture because the regular army were too decent to do the job. And this is a fact. The regular army were very much liked. A lot of them married and stayed there.
We weren't frightened of British soldiers at all. We loved them. I mean, an awful lot of us girls had dates with them and went out with them. But at the same time, we were warned about being seen with them because we knew that some girls had had their hair cut off, and 1 or 2 girls had been shot by the IRA.
The ordinary poor British Tommy was a decent fellow. We had very little grudge against him. We didn't want to hurt him at all. It was the intelligence officers, the Black&Tans, the deliberately organised ruffians that we were up against.
We were ruthless to the marked degree of going to the limit of law and order. We'll put it that way. Now, we get the message. A farm had been burnt down, or the road had been dug up and the trees dropped down in the road, and we got ambushed then. We'd armor-plated on, you know. It didn't do a lot of harm to us, and then we went on.
We could tell the way raids were going by the sound of the Closley tenders. Said Anfield. They had a distinctive note. If those tenders stopped anywhere around there, you were likely to get the search.
Now, if you found any culprits or caught any there, well, you simply just arrested them and brought them in and interrogated them. We may interrogate them there and then on the scene. I'm not going to tell you what happened. And question them. And if you got anything out on them, well and good.
And the search was really quite brutal. They kicked the door in, stick a bayonet up against you, you know. So they terrified us, and then they searched the house. It's only quite fair to say they'd good reason for it, you know.
We'd search for arms. Now, the floorboards had come up if it was elsewhere that. The fireplace, repeat. If it was in, well, it was taken out. The bed was ripped open. We found rifles, revolvers, and ammunition.
If at first the ordinary Irish people had disliked the violence used by the volunteers or IRA, there could be no doubt on whose side they would come down in the end, the longer this sort of thing went on. IRA men brought in with a captured Republican flag for interrogation.
We used to question very strictly. And then what we did was to put pressure on them. Now, there was notices posted up every Black&Tan shop and the two Sinn Féiners shop. We put them on the telepoles, trees, etc.
An auxiliary casualty.
Human beings was going to stand so much and so much. That's all, not all of it. And you're going to retaliate, aren't you? You're not going to be simple John and sit there and get smacked across the nose. If you're going to get killed, well, if your life's at stake, the other fellow's going before you, well, that's my way to look at it.
Burning, by way of reprisal, became a standard police reaction. The burning of farms, the burning of towns. Cooperative creameries were burned as a means of hitting through their jobs more people than could be burned out of a house. As an Irish newspaper put it, when they threw petrol on the Sinn Féiners' house, they were merely pouring paraffin on the flames of Irish nationality.
Commandant General Tom Barry, at that time 21 years old.
Well, every man that was allowed onto the column was selected. And you had good calibre there. You had a fine lot of good, decent Irishmen. There were a lot of brave men there amongst them. And I would say that at least 9 out of 10 of them were prepared to give their life, even though they felt that it would end like all our struggles and disaster, but they were going to make the British pay once it started. And I was very, very lucky in the calibre of the men that came under my command. And I made it clear to every man that joined the column, that volunteered for the column, that they'd have to live hard, they'd have to eat when we could get it, they'd have to travel far and fast, they'd have to sleep where they could find it, in a hay barn or in a field. And they weren't to come on unless they accepted that position. And above all, they had to accept the discipline of me, the column commander, and my section commander. And I must say I never had the slightest bit of trouble with one of them.
18-year-old student member of the IRA, Kevin Barry.
The Black&Tans arrested Barry. They brought him into our barracks, which was very near, and ill-treated him, beat him up, and our sergeant major had to get our guard to turn out to rescue Barry from the police. That was the way he received his injuries.
In spite of mass protests, Barry was hanged, the first of 24 IRA men to be executed in the next 8 months. This is Michael Collins's plan for a terrible day in November 1920, to be known as Bloody Sunday. Collins had located the hideouts of a number of undercover British intelligence officers in Dublin, some of them actually posing as Sinn Féin supporters. Collins gave orders for them all to be shot in their houses individually by IRA men at 9 o'clock that Sunday morning.
I had 8 men with me. And we agreed that we'd meet outside St. Andrew's Church in Westland Row at 9 o'clock on Sunday morning. Some of us got mass that morning there. And we proceeded along to the house. Knocked at the door.
servant opened the door, and I said I want to see Captain Bennett or Lieutenant Ames. Oh, she says, we're in bed. And she went to close the door, and I just put my foot in. So it's always, I'm a friend of theirs. So she looked behind me and she seen the other men. Then we all got in any case. And she said to me, the folding doors is open. That is, I'd have no trouble. And she, Captain Bennett sleeps in there, and Lieutenant Ames sleeps down there. She was doing very good, you know. So I sent 3 men down to cover off Ames. And I went to the folding doors. And as I went to the folding doors, your man went for his pillar. He had a 45 Colt automatic under the pillar, because there was 5 or 6 guns covering him. So I said to him, well, come on, get out. And he went down to Captain or Lieutenant Ames's room. I put the 2 up against the wall. I said, the Lord of mercy on your souls. I plugged the 2 of them.
"14 British officers were shot altogether that Sunday morning, but the day was still young. There was to be an important football match at Croke Park that afternoon. One of the Tipperary forwards was Tommy Ryan. The whistle had just gone for a foul by a Dublin player.
I would at the time would take a free into the Dublin goal. When the next thing happened was fire was opened from the canal end of the field, machine gun fire and rifle and revolver fire.
Soldiers, Black and Tans, I can't really say which, appeared on the surrounding walls and started firing into the crowd.
It was obvious that they were live bullets because the bullets were hopping off the railway on, and I was a senior volunteer officer at the time, and I knew exactly that it was live ammunition, and I threw myself flat on the ground.
The park was adjoined the railway line and the canal. Some, I believe, actually got across the canal, but these I saw hundreds of people running down the railway line towards safety. It was fantastic sight.
A Tipperary player was one of the 12 killed. In further reprisal for that morning's killing, 2 senior IRA men and an innocent Sinn Féin supporter from County Clare, who'd been arrested the night before, were murdered by the police in the guardroom of Dublin Castle. By December 1920, there were some 700 of the dreaded auxiliaries in Ireland. Their routine patrols were ambushed from time to time, and after one such ambush, a reprisal was carried out on a hitherto unprecedented scale against the centre of the city of Cork.
He started in revenge for the casualties we received in the ambush. We had 11 casualties there when we were ambushed. They first busted into 1 or 2 pubs and out themselves. Proceeded to set fire and loot. And they prevented the fire brigade putting out the fires.
When the fire brigades very bravely came out, then they even cut the hoses, you know, to prevent any help being given. And it was dreadful because in a lot of those big stores at that time, the employees slept upstairs. And the next day when you went down, there was nothing other than left rubble and the smell of smoke.
Well, there's a certain tough gang in the K Company. They were the instigators of this, including the commanding officer. And they were the people who did a lot of the looting. About 25 of these people were responsible for most of the damage done in Cork.
An official official British inquiry into the event was never made public.
Bones about killing. Anyone that comes into my house in my country and tries to take over by force, I'm going to kill him, and I'll use any and every means to do it. And I'm saying that now in the winter of my life. I'm at a week, an hour to live, or a day to live, or a year, and I am not one bit sorry for it. To any man or God. My life according to anything, and I think to be a cheap price to pay. Because you must remember that when I was a boy, we were slave-minded, serfs. And they that come along and lift us out of that position, I looked upon them as gods.